is many years ago, but I wrote a proposal to have a master's program through UWW. And I even did a budget so everybody made money, and it was, but it didn't go anywhere. It didn't go anywhere. I think that the UWW has always been on the fringes of the university, and so actually awarding a master's degree through this fringe program was anathema to many administrators. It's just something they couldn't bend their heads around, that a program like UWW would. And I didn't even have, by the way, I didn't have UWW awarding the degree. I had the graduate school awarding the degree. But it didn't fly, which is too bad, because it could have been a graduate level UWW where people could continue to explore, and they would have this relationship with an advisor that a lot of graduate students don't have, and especially master's students. Probably in the 90s, mid-90s. I was actually, this is at a time when I was, believe it or not, on the graduate council. And the reason that I ended up there was that there was a big push for mentoring at that time. You remember that when?
Oh yes.
Yeah, and that's what we did. So they asked me to be on this graduate council to represent special programs. They weren't special programs then; it was outreach, and so I floated it to actually the person who was chairing the graduate council at that time, and he was actually pretty interested in it, but he couldn't get any support, from various departments, so it didn't go. But I still think it could go. I still think it would be a good thing to do.
It would be a great thing to do.
Yeah.
But it flies in the face of graduate school more than it flies in the face of undergraduate school.
That's right. Yeah.
Whether they like it or not, graduate school is job training. It's called education, but it's preparing you to be a paid intellectual. It's preparing you to be a paid English teacher or a history teacher, not at the public school level,
right,
but at the college level.
Or an administrator in a business organization.
Not a bad thing, within limits. But when you have a marketing model for higher education, from entering first-year student to graduating doctoral students, you can produce too many PhDs in English. You can produce too many PhDs in, maybe not in physics.
Yeah.
But if your model for the survival of the program is growth of students, at some point you're
right,
going to exceed the employability.
That's already happened. I mean, that's happened years ago. Yeah.
It happened years ago.
Guy who worked at UWW, a young man who was in a doctoral program in political science. And when he finished his degree, he moved back to, I think, Oregon, and couldn't get a job, could not get a job teaching at a college, and I stayed in touch with him for for a couple of years after he left, and he ended up working for the city of Eugene, I think, doing something that had nothing to do with political science.
Right.
But the degree probably helped him.
Yeah.
Get the job. But there are a lot of graduate students and get their PhDs or their EDDs, and then it's really hard to find a job.
Well, and now it's really turned ugly. Again, I'm not talking from any qualified position, but we all have been reading about for 2-3 decades now, that colleges, community colleges, four-year colleges, universities are increasingly relying upon adjunct faculty.
Mm-hmm.
They are there.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have PhDs or EDDs in their fields, and there's not jobs and then as the economy closes down, or as the schools get cheaper and cheaper, they say, oh, we can hire 4 adjuncts, pay them no benefits, underpay them by the hour,
Right.
and not hire 6 PhDs that we're going to have to pay benefits for, and et cetera, et cetera.
At a higher wage. And my brother was a French teacher in Seattle, Washington. And he was an adjunct for 7 years before he finally got a job. And he would drive from one community college to another. There were 3 of them in his area, in the Seattle area, and he would drive from one to another, sometimes all 3 in one day.
Yep.
And he finally did get a job at one of them teaching French. But it was a rough go for a while. My other brother is an adjunct now in Utah, and he has a PhD. Teaches humanities courses, required humanities courses. They have to take it. It's interesting what's happened to education. I'm on the board of a program called North Star. You may have heard of it for teenagers. It's kind of a little Hampshire college for teenagers, and it's a wonderful program, and it does just the things that we've talking about. Yet kids who are miserable in high school, they come to North Star. They are asked, what are you interested in? Not, what do you need to know, where do you want to go, but what are you interested in? And they start there. And I'll just tell one story, which I love, because I heard this from the student who was actually on the board at the time I joined the board. And in the 6th grade, he lost it one day. And he got up and stood on his desk, and then he walked across other students' desks, and then got to the door, and he turned around and he said, I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. And by the time he got home, the principal had called his parents, and they didn't know what to do. And so they heard about
Start giving him a hug.
Exactly. They heard about North Star, so they went to talk to the director, and the kid said, "Okay, let's give it a chance." And so we met with the director, and the director said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "Well, I like skateboarding." And so the director said, "Well, okay. Do you just want to ride, or do you want to make skateboards, or do you want to teach skateboarding? Do you want to compete? What do you like?" "I just want to ride." "Okay. Well, come on in. Sit in the common area. If you get interested in something, let me know. We'll keep talking. In the meantime, you can skateboard." So he sat there for a week or two, looking around, and he sees all these kids. One's learning Japanese. There's a writing group. There's a science group. There's a music group, and there are no tests, there are no grades, there are no age grade separations, and so he says to himself, I think I'd like to learn how to write. So he joins the writing group, and he turns out he has some real talent for writing, and he likes to write. So eventually he becomes the co-editor of the newsletter. And then he, just down the street is a rock climbing place, that one on Route 9. So he would go down there. Turns out he's got some real talent for climbing, and he loves it. And so after I guess he spent a couple of years in North Star, and he realized that there was an outdoor education program at Greenfield Community College. So he got involved in that, finished that program, got his associate's degree, and decided he was going to do some serious climbing. So he got a job, saved his money, and went down to the Amazon and climbed in the Andes. Came back, worked again, went out to El Capitan and climbed El Capitan in California. By then, he'd really built some cred, from as a climbing person, and ended up getting a part-time job as a climbing coach for a college climbing team. I didn't even know such things existed.
No, I didn't either.
but yes, and then he got a job with an outdoor education program, and down in Connecticut, and he's happy as can be because he's working with kids like himself, and they're doing outdoor stuff and ropes courses and things like that. So that's the thing I love to see. It's the thing that we were able to see in inquiry and UWW over the years, people just getting turned on to things and being able to follow them out. And that, to me, is the most exciting part of education. I've been doing it. I got on the board after I retired from UWW in 2009, and then became the president in 2011, I think. So I've been doing it for a long time, and it's just really rewarding. I mean, some of these kids are so miserable in high school. They're just miserable. They're bullied, and they're ignored. But the teachers are constrained by the curriculum frameworks. They have to do these things, and the kids have to take these tests. And you can understand how it happened with an effort to give everybody an overall education at some level, an effort to assess what's happening in the schools. But it doesn't suit all the kids. Some kids thrive in the high schools that exist today. They're in the orchestra, or they're athletes, or they're in plays, and they have a wonderful time. But some kids are just terrorized by high school.
What you're describing, Gary, is implicit in all of the special programs of the special type, the ones that couldn't easily move back into one of the colleges, like UWW, IP, BDIC, is that story you just told is how kids learn.
Mm-hmm.
You have a little baby, and the little baby, you help the baby walk, and you help the baby begin to talk, but you don't say, well, you have to play with the yellow blocks between 10 and 11, and then you can color between 1 and 2.
That's right.
You don't do that. That's not how their little brains are expanding. And they discover all kinds of things, and attentive parents enforce stuff. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's not so positive, but it's student-centered, it's kid-centered, it's teaching people.
Yeah.
There's a challenge to make that on a mass scale. Public school has, even a small public school has a lot of people. My parents took Latin, classical Greek, and French in high school.
Wow.
Right? My high school, big, fancy, smart-ass, all-white, middle-class, suburban Boston high school, didn't even offer Greek. Right? And they only offered 2 years of Latin. And he didn't have a full-time job. So he went to whoever you go to, and he said, I'm fluent in German. I was a translator from the Navy. I'm a war hero. And I don't care what your prejudices are against Germany anymore. I'm going to teach German. And they hired him. So he taught Latin and German.
Speaks well for the school, or the superintendent, yeah.
Yeah. But
That's
it
great.
wasn't a thing. It was totally idiosyncratic.
Just
to
this guy,
community.
yeah.
But to swing back to something earlier, a lot of the mass education coming out of the 19th century into the 20th was to make better workers. Sort of the crude way of putting it was Mr. Ford needed more people on the assembly line who could make more cars more efficiently. And so there's a whole other model, built into the very structure of public education.
And as a matter of fact, the idea behind land-grant colleges was really, yes, to make it possible for working class people to go to college, but there was a sort of mechanical and agricultural part to what those colleges were teaching, and it had to do with better informed workers who could solve problems and that sort of thing.
That's how the English department came to UMass.
Yeah.
That's
how UMass came to UMass.
Or to Mass Aggie, way back at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. The argument was, to make better whatever,
right,
we need to have, our students learning these things.
And we started as Mass Aggie.
Yeah, and we were good.
We were a good agricultural school, right.
We were really good at it.
Yeah.
And there are really good assembly line worker people,
That could solve problems and fix machines.
Yeah. There's a little theater company in Northampton called City Studio Theater. And in the summer, we rented the theater space in Look Park. I forget what it's called.
Yeah.
The Pines.
The Pines.
The Pines
The
Theater.
Pines Theater.
Yeah.
And we did Shakespeare. And one day I'm selling tickets, and my auto mechanic and his entire family buy tickets. Not just him, his brother and sister-in-law. And there were about 12 of them.
That's great.
And they came to every production. And they told their friends. And when, that was the one time I sold tickets. But when you looked around at the audience, it was families who were having a Saturday afternoon in the park, and they had a little picnic, and then they came to the theater.
That's great.
Right? Which is where Shakespeare started.
Yeah.
With the groundlings. My point of that anecdote is that culture for everybody and people who work with their hands, plumbers, because we've mentioned plumbers a couple times today, but it could be electricians, it could be beauticians, it could be, you know, all kinds of people. And the IWW students often in my classes were afraid, they were scared of a museum.
Yeah.
And they were never been to live theater. And we got them doing that, and they loved it.
I loved it.
They were still going to do their UWW thing and do whatever, but all of a sudden, this class chasm had been bridged.